Hello and welcome to Unit 9 on Quality Assurance, in which the translation stage is drawing to a close and we'll discuss the quality assurance stage of the project. In this unit, we'll consider the workflows related to the revision, review and proofreading stages. We'll define these terms according to the international standard ISO 17100 on the provision of translation services, and we'll consider the CAT tool features and processes which facilitate this quality assurance stage. The quality assurance settings inside a CAT tool will also be discussed in more detail, and their use will be contextualized. First, we'll consider ways for the project manager to monitor and control the project once translation is underway. Once the project files have been sent out for translation, the project manager's role is then to monitor and control the project timescale and quality level. This is achieved by anticipating the risks that might be inherent in any project and considering potential solutions and alternative plans for handling such scenarios should they occur. For example, have linguists received their files, and could they successfully import these into their CAT tool ready to start translating? Project managers should ask linguists to confirm the successful receipt of files and ask them to prepare their own analysis report for pricing purposes, but also because this can serve as useful reassurance to the project manager that all is well with the files. Obtaining this confirmation is important, as the project manager does not want to get to the end of the translation stage only to find that some files have been overlooked due to technical issues. The project manager should then stay in sufficiently regular contact with the linguists or other suppliers to ensure that the project is still running on time. It's better to be able to identify issues early on so that these can be addressed before they become a bigger issue, which might cause delays in delivery or impact on the quality of the final output. It is useful for the project manager to have a dedicated strategy for dealing with the large number of email messages involved in managing a project. The project manager might wish to create separate folders and use filters to sort the messages into project-specific folders. The project manager may have requested a staggered delivery of files during the translation stage, so that some files can be prepared in advance of the final delivery date. In such cases, it's important to be able to track the delivery of these files and ascertain the remaining files to be delivered. This could all be recorded in the project timescale document, such as in the Gantt chart, or in a separate tracking file, which details all the files included in the project and shows what stage each of these files is up to. For ease, and because more than one person may update this document, the structure of this file will usually follow the structure of the project folder. Requesting a staggered delivery of files also reassures the project manager that linguists are progressing steadily with the translation stage, and allows the project manager to assess any potential shortcomings from individual suppliers. The importance of contingency planning in the timescale cannot be understated. Project managers are always advised to include a certain amount of buffer time in their timescale planning. This allows them to be more responsive to events which might occur during the project, such as a linguist falling ill and the project manager needing to reallocate their work, or perhaps another client contacts you and requires a quote for their new project. Project managers must include a certain amount of flexibility in their workflow planning to ensure that they can deal with such events without a negative impact on the delivery of the current project. There are various tools available for managing project milestones, tasks and their dependencies, communication with the team, assessing and managing risks to the project, and some even offer support for managing recurring or related tasks and allowing the creation of a Gantt chart within the software and linked to the project. As discussed in Unit 4, translation management systems often provide features to address these management processes. However, aside from using a TMS, there are other project management programs which could be of use, such as Translation Office 3000, Trello, Zoho Projects, Slack, and many more. And some of these can be used for free for small-scale projects, although limitations and restrictions may still apply. Management tasks and workflow processes will differ in localization depending on the chosen method for sending out and receiving the project files. If the project manager has chosen the single file approach, then the single XLIF file will be received back from the translator and re-imported into the CAT tool. The project manager will check that all the translations have been confirmed so that the software can close down the translation process and reopen the XLIF file for the review process. Once the document has been opened as a review file, it can then be forwarded to the assigned reviser. In the project packages approach, the project manager must receive the packages and unpack their contents to verify the completed translations have all been processed and returned. The project manager must then create new package files to send to the revisers, containing the translated materials, the client-specific terminology database used, and any other relevant files. A new translation memory may be created in order to capture any amendments made by the reviser. It might be useful to keep separate translation memories for the translator and the reviser until the proposed translations have been checked and confirmed by both individuals. This may depend on the chosen update settings for the translation memories. Some tools, by default, will overwrite existing translations in the memory with any updates to the segment. So, for example, if the translator confirms their translation of a segment and sends it to the translation memory, and the reviser changes that segment, then the translation stored may well be overwritten by the revision. This might cause issues if the translator does not agree with the reviser's corrections and wishes to reinsert their original translation. Separate memories for translators and revisers means that different suggestions from different professionals can be tracked and monitored. This new package file, once compiled, can then be forwarded to the reviser, who will import this into their version of the specified CAT tool. In the server-based environment, passing files on to the reviewer can be an automated process, and as the linguists working on the project are sent login details to access the server, there is no need for the project manager to receive and verify the translated document before it is sent out again to the reviser. When initially creating the project on the server, the project manager can specify that quality assurance checks must be completed by the translator before the system will allow the translation to be delivered and considered completed. The project manager or project owner, and in some cases this may be the client themselves, will receive notifications to inform them when translations are received back and then sent back out to the revisers, so that the project's progress can be monitored automatically. As discussed in the previous unit, CAT tools offer users an integrated quality assurance module, which can automate the process of checking for potential errors and inaccuracies in the target text. Standalone tools offer to check the use of terminology, the inclusion of layout tags in each segment, and various settings relating to segment length and content verification. We can consider each of these elements of the quality assurance process in terms of their relevance in the professional context in order to better understand which options to select when devising a quality assurance plan. The severity of these elements can usually be adjusted in the CAT tool so that users can choose according to the project specification whether inaccuracies should generate an error message or a warning. Under the heading of segment verification, exclusions and length limitations, it's possible to check for forgotten or empty translations. This ensures that all target segments contain a translation or an appropriate equivalent. By default, this would otherwise generate an error message. It's also possible to check for instances where the source and target segments are identical. In some cases, the source and target may need to be identical, such as when the segment contains a name or another non-variable element. In other cases, this may be an indication that a segment has been overlooked during translation, and locale-specific adjustment may be needed. It's also possible to check for segments which exceed a specified length. This is usually measured either as a percentage of the source text segment or by the number of words. This is a useful check in cases where the formatting of the original document may place constraints on the amount of text expansion permitted within the translation. Furthermore, when processing subtitling files, it may be necessary to limit the target segment length in accordance with the number of characters permitted within a caption. Checks can be performed for forbidden characters, where users can also specify which characters are forbidden, such as ensuring that all currency symbols included in the target are appropriate for the locale. With the exclusions checks, it's also possible to instruct the cat tool to exclude certain segments from the QA check, such as locked segments, which may have been inserted by the project manager during the pre-translation stage, using the approved translations. If the segment is locked and the translator has not altered it, then there is no need to include this in the quality assurance verification process. The inconsistencies checks will check the content of the segment further for inconsistent translations. This is searching for different translations of source segments which repeat throughout the text. For example, if the text in the English source segment says, "Please click here to return to the main page," this portion of text may be repeated on different pages of a website. If the translator translates this as "Haga clic aquí para volver a la página principal," then the cat tool can check that each occurrence of this English segment is translated consistently throughout the text. These settings will also check for repeated words in the target to ensure that words have not been accidentally copy-pasted more than once. While checking for unedited fuzzy matches means that these translations will be appropriately edited and checked for context, or otherwise flagged up for checking. Punctuation settings will check that conventions regarding punctuation have been correctly implemented, highlighting segments which either require extra white space inserting or removing before the punctuation. The cat tools will also check if multiple spaces have been accidentally inserted during the translation, and, if necessary, a check can also be performed to ensure that the source and target segments end with the same punctuation mark. The numbers settings will check that numbers, dates, measurements and times have been written as required by the target language conventions. The word list settings can be used to search for deprecated terms or other words which should not appear in the target text. For example, a client may once have preferred for all instances of zona euro to be translated as Eurozone, but after a time the client decides to change this preference to be Euro area. The terminology database can be updated to reflect this preference. However, using this extra check ensures that any instance of Eurozone inserted into the translation through habit will be noticed and can be amended before the translation reaches the project manager. Regular expressions are a sequence of symbols and characters which express a string of text or a text pattern to be searched for in a larger portion of text. These can be used to create customized and more specific searches. The chosen settings for the quality assurance can then be exported to an XML document and imported into other tools for quicker reuse. Generally, standalone cat tools will run these QA checks in the background while translation is still ongoing. This allows the translator to see and attend to any errors as they occur, as well as anticipating any further similar errors later on in the text. Once the translator has completed their translation, it's also possible to invoke the QA check as a single action. This will produce a verification report which shows details of any quality assurance issues which may have been identified. giving details of the error itself and the segment number in which the inaccuracy appears. If the linguist deems that the inaccuracy is insignificant or inapplicable to the target language, it is possible to ignore it, meaning that it requires no further attention, while still also including it in the verification report. The reports can be saved to the user's computer, and for some projects, the linguist may be asked to include this report as one of the project deliverables, so that the project manager can fully monitor whether the checks were carried out and resolved. In cases where the project requires the use of international standards, either with regards to the provision of a translation service or for quality management, the agency may be asked to provide documentation to prove that quality systems were in place and adhered to during each stage of the project. In such cases, the creation of a verification report becomes essential to achieving full compliance with the project brief. Once the translation and the QA checks have been completed, the translator is ready to compile the necessary files and return their translation to the project manager according to their instructions and ready for the revision and review stage. Revision, review and proofreading are terms which are often misunderstood, and some clients may even use these terms interchangeably. However, the international standard ISO 17100 on the provision of translation services defines these terms as follows. Revision is the bilingual examination of target language content against source language content for its suitability for the agreed purpose. Bilingual editing is sometimes used as a synonym for revision. The international standard stipulates that all target language content must be revised by a different translation professional to the one who originally translated it, and that this professional should hold the necessary qualifications in translation specified within the standard. The reviser should correct any errors found or make recommendations to the original translator for their correction. The reviser should also inform the project manager of any corrections made or recommended. Once corrections have been made, the reviser will repeat this revision process until they and the project manager are satisfied with the quality of the output. It is worth noting that in this context, corrections may at times include retranslation. Review is the monolingual examination of target language content for its suitability for the agreed purpose. This is also sometimes known as monolingual editing, and not all projects require a review to be carried out. Review is usually carried out by a subject matter expert who will check the target language content for domain accuracy and the text suitability for the required purpose, making suggestions for corrections or amendments where necessary. In some cases, the reviewer may be instructed to make those changes themselves and to inform the project manager of the content of those changes. The reviewer may be another specialist translator, or it may be an individual appointed by the client themselves. Proofreading is the examination of the revised target language content and the application of corrections before printing. This would be a final stage in the linguistic quality assurance process and would be carried out on the target text as a standalone document. Proofreading would usually be carried out in accordance with the style guide, which is defined as the set of editing and formatting instructions for the specified document. This should have been included as a reference file to accompany the translation files or package, so that these considerations could be taken into account during the translation stage. Both the revision and proofreading stages should check that the style guide has been fully implemented. In the absence of the client's own style guide, translation and localization companies should provide their own set of style guidelines for use. When generating the required files for the revision stage, the project manager has to bear in mind the question of whether the revision will be carried out inside or outside of a CAP tool. Let's first consider the scenario where the reviser will revise the translation inside the CAP tool. Similar to the single file sharing approach used when sending the files out for translation, the project manager can once again send the fully translated XLIF file to the reviser, or a new project package can be created for the revision stage. Many CAT tools, including the cloud-based tools, use the XLIF 2.0 specification and are therefore able to import XLIF files created in other CAT tools. The SDL XLIF is more specific, so additional support for importing this more specific XLIF file is included with many other CAT tools. Once the reviser has imported the XLIF into their CAT tool and opened the file for review, the view inside the CAT tool may be slightly different, as can be seen in our SDL Trados Studio screenshot. The translation results window is no longer visible. Instead, we can see the reviewing pane, which shows the list of errors and their severities. The reviser works through the document, checking each target segment against the source to ensure that it is complete, accurate, and appropriate for the specified purpose. And any changes made to these segments will be highlighted using the Track Changes feature, similar to that used in word processing software. When changes are made to a segment, the segment status changes from confirmed, as was previously indicated by the green tick, to rejected, indicated usually by a symbol in red, and any altered text appears in a different colour to the original translation, as can be seen here in the highlighted boxes. The reviser can also add comments to segments where required in order to further explain their choice of amendments. Generally, the reviser will not confirm these segments, so they will not be sent to the translation memory just yet. Once all the segments have been revised and changes have been made, the reviser can save the document without updating the translation memory and either return this to the project manager, or they may have been asked to send it on to the original translator themselves. The original translator will then open the XLIF file and either accept or reject the changes made before reconfirming the segments, so that any accepted changes will then be incorporated into the project translation memory. In cases where the reviser is not using a CAT tool, it's still possible to use a similar workflow process for this stage. CAT tools provide a function known as exporting to bilingual format, which creates a bilingual document that can be opened inside word processing software in order to carry out the revision. As can be seen in the screenshot, this feature produces a table containing colour-coded segments which denote the type of translation memory match and showing source and target segments side by side. The reviser is still required to use track changes when making amendments to the target segments, and should save the document without making any changes to the file name, as this can cause irregularities when trying to re-import the bilingual file back into the CAT tool. The completed bilingual review file can then be emailed back to the project manager or the translator, depending on the project instructions, who will then re-import it using the Update from Bilingual Review feature. This merges the changes into the XLIF file so that the translator can then work through the text, accepting or rejecting changes, confirming the segments as they work, and updating the translation memory with the revised translations. For the purposes of review, which we recall is also known as monolingual editing and may be carried out either by a subject matter expert appointed by the agency or one chosen by the client, it's necessary then to generate a monolingual document for the reviewer. A CAT tool will usually include an option to save the target file as, or perhaps it might be known as generating the target translation, which produces a version of the target file in its original file format. So if the file was originally an HTML file, as in our project, then the review document will also be in HTML. The reviewer can then check and amend this document, once more saving it in the same format and without adjusting the file name. In standalone tools, it is then possible to re-import this file, and the CAT tool will scan for and automatically insert the changes made by the reviewer. Once more, the amended segments will be marked as rejected, so that the project manager can accept or reject the changes before reconfirming the segment and updating the translation memory with the reviewer's amendments. If the original file format does not lend itself to easy editing and viewing, such as an HTML file, which would need to be opened in Notepad for editing purposes, then it's still possible for the reviewer to work on another bilingual review document, and the amendments can then be re-imported, similar to the way in which the reviser worked. Proofreading of the final text can be done using the same options for review, and it is equally important to ensure that any proofreading changes made monolingually are also incorporated into the translation memory in order to avoid issues of non-correspondence at the segment level. This concludes our Unit 9 presentation on quality assurance. Our final unit in this course, Unit 10 on project delivery, will discuss the final steps in the project lifecycle. We'll learn about linguistic quality assessment, as well as performing the necessary maintenance on the translation memories once the client has made any required amendments to the localized text. In the meantime, your task for this unit will be to investigate the options available in each of the suggested CAT tools within the quality assurance settings, as well as for the revision and review stages. You can download your guided exploration questions and resources from the Moodle course page area, and when you are ready, you should proceed to answering the end of unit quiz questions.